Welcome to Make Your Money Matter with Brad Barrett, the show that aims to change the way you think about wealth management. Brad is a financial advisor, established radio host, and author of Retire Right. He is a managing director and partner at One Capital Management, an SEC-registered investment advisory firm managing over $4 billion for clients across the nation. Brad and his team are dedicated to helping clients protect and preserve their assets so they can reach their investment and retirement goals. And now, your host of Make Your Money Matter, Brad Barrett.
Welcome in to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. Ahead on today's show, we're going to talk about the difference between perception and interpretation. We're going to actually talk about a very famous published image of a duck rabbit image. If you're not driving right now, you can Google this, type in duck rabbit image. You'll see this. Likely you've seen it before. And we're going to talk about how this relates to the economy, especially here in 2024 in an election year. But before we get started, make sure to go to our website at onecapital.com. You can find out more about myself or any one of our fiduciary, experienced, and credentialed advisors here at the firm. You can also click on our media tab and you can download and subscribe to the Make Your Money Matter podcast. I always ask, when we start our show, is if you are listening here and you're subscribing, make sure to leave us a review, give us a comment. It's good to hear feedback to better our show and to share it with others. And with that, let's get started. So as I shared, if you are sitting in front of a computer right now, or not driving, I should say, type in duck rabbit picture. Now, when you do that on Google or Safari or whatever search engine you're using, you'll likely see a photo that I'm going to reference today. And this photo was actually published in 1892. It really focuses on the idea what your mind and your eyes pick up first. Is it a duck or a rabbit? Now, I don't know about you, but I really feel like this depends on who you ask, because either answer was correct. Now, as you can probably imagine and see here, the image itself doesn't change. And if you stop listening to me for a second, went and grabbed a cup of coffee or something and came back, the image will be exactly the same when you return. But what changes is your perception of the image. So to different folks at different times, it's either a duck or a rabbit. So over the last century plus, this rabbit-duck illusion has actually appeared in a bunch of magazines and books. The famed philosopher, actually, Ludwig Wittgenstein, I looked this up, used the image to show the difference between perception and interpretation, largely what I wanted to write our show about this week. So if you see a duck, you declare what? It's a duck. It has to be a duck. But once you're shown that it could be a rabbit, you then declare, well, I see it as a duck. Now, studies have actually shown that which animal you see may have to do with your sociological and psychological factors. For example, when the image is shown to people, let's say around Easter, they're far more likely to see a rabbit because of what? The Easter bunny. Now, in many ways, how we perceive and interpret this iconic illusion and the sociological and psychological factors that play into it mirrors really, I think, how we perceive or interpret the economy. That's my bridge for today. Now, depending on, a number of factors when you look at an image or the season you're in, same thing has to do with the economy. So, depending on a number of factors like the time of year, geography, your personal employment status maybe, or the media that you consume, we can see the same thing or the same data sets in two very different ways. And guess what? Both can be right. So let's bring it into this year. Those who see a promising 2024 global economy, we're just going to call them a rabbit today, all right? They will point to things like the latest monthly inflation data, all right? The consumer price index, the CPI, showed a 0.1% increase for the month of November, which, by the way, as of this recording, was the most recent data available. Now, extrapolate that over 12 months, and the annual rate is approximately 1.2% for CPI, or consumer price index, which is well below the goal of the Fed's 2%. Now, those who are coming into 2024 who see a struggling economy, let's say we'll call them a duck, for example, will note that if you exclude things like food and energy from the latest CPI, you get a 0.3% increase for the month of November. Again, latest data set for this recording. And if you annualize that, that rate becomes 3.6%, which is above the Fed's 2% goal. So to see a rabbit, just look at the latest data showing things like job growth continuing at a healthy pace, okay? The unemployment rate remains low, well below historical norms. In the US, it's about 3.7%. Now, the duck, on the other hand, will come into focus if you zero in more closely, though, on employment. And by the way, friends, you've likely seen this in different media outlets. Some will zoom out and some will zoom in. And again, both can be right, but it comes down to perception and interpretation. So again, the duck will focus and you'll zero in on employment. And most of those jobs, if you look at it, are in the services sectors or increased government hiring, while jobs in manufacturing are actually coming along at a much slower pace. Now, I could go on and talk about purchasing managers index. I could talk about supply chain management as relationships to this bridge I'm making between perception and interpretation. But here's where viewing the rabbit duck illusion and the economy actually differ. So with the image, it's impossible to see both animals at the same time. Try it. The perception of one voids the perception of the other. Now, friends, in 19 years of doing this as a financial advisor in the financial services industry, I don't believe we can do that with the economy. If we want to, and we do, we're able to take in the full picture. The rabbit duck, I'll call it. That's such a thing, by the way. I mean, look, at Thanksgiving, you have something called the turducken. Why can't we have a rabbit duck? I digress.
Stay connected. Get frequent updates on the show. Follow Brad Barrett and Make Your Money Matter on most social media platforms. And catch full episodes of Make Your Money Matter streaming now on our YouTube channel. To schedule your no-obligation appointment, go to onecapital.com or call 805-410-5454.
And here's what we see here at One Capital Management. So I want to bring up. Inflation is on the decline, and I think well off the peak over 9% that we saw in June of 2022. And it's also stubbornly above the 2% goal by the central bank. So we're somewhere in the middle. And most economists, if you look out there and study it, expect it to stay above 3% for the most part of 2024. The labor market is actually in a good place, even though I think Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell believes wage growth must cool in order to show inflation is truly under control. But again, the labor market we think is in a good place. But end of the day, smart investing requires absorbing the entirety of the economic picture. This allows us to know when and how to do things like diversify. So how to manage risk, how to look toward the horizon, not just the viewable stretch ahead. Economies, friends, are extremely complex entities. And it always baffles me that, and I get it, but news media tries to simplify it and we take it into granular function. And then that's what we walk into today with this one little nugget of information, when the reality is that nugget is just a one piece of the overall puzzle. Economies are extremely complex entities, especially the United States economy. And I know this may strike a chord with some people, but seeing it from all angles and viewpoints gives us perspective on what we do as an investment manager with your investments. You know, current economic reality creates opportunity as markets react or overreact, as they tend to do, and failing to look really forward over the long term. Remember, investors are not buying last year's profits. They're buying next year's expected profits. You've likely heard this before when talking with an investment manager, like past performance doesn't reflect future gains. We don't want to pay for, last quarter's heat map that showed one sector up. That may not be the case in the future. So remember, as an investor and us as portfolio managers, we're not buying last year's profits. We're looking at next year's expected profits. Now, I want to bring up one thing for a second. If you take a look again at that image, the rabbit and the duck, you can Google it right now. Again, don't do it if you're driving, obviously. And if you put them together right next to each other, and you imagine them right next to each other, and if you were to be asked, most people, not surprisingly, see either two rabbits or two ducks sitting side by side. Again, to my point earlier that you can't see the same image in this at the same time. But if you put them together, ironically, you still see whatever your mind wants you to see. If you saw a duck, you're going to see two ducks. If you saw a rabbit, you're going to see two rabbits. But when given the cue, duck eats rabbit, as an example, the brain, your brain, is given the context it needs, context, friends, to distinguish two identical images. By the way, this was actually a study, according to the University of Alberta neuroscientist Kyle Mathewson. He actually demonstrates that we can control the brain's way of interpreting information with just a few words or with an image. Mathewson actually went on to say we should all be mindful of that when, for example, we're reading a news story. We're often interpreting and understanding information that and how we want to see it. I think for all of us, and what I want to share today on our show, is this is useful advice, I think, to kick off the new year. We're in an election year. We just spoke about that recently on our show. I'm well aware. I think it's really important to be mindful of the psychological factors that are playing in here. If we want to see, doom and gloom, we'll see it. We're not at a shortage for fear selling out there in the world. And I'm not saying none of it has its merit or it's not real, but it's important to protect what you have going on in your mind. It's like mind wars. And you think about that for a second and how we walk into our days and how we walk into our life, whether it's money or anything else we're doing, what's going on up in our head matters. I mentioned this before. I always found it interesting as a stat that on average, the human brain has about 40 to 50,000 thoughts a day. Think about that. 40 to 50,000 thoughts a day. I guess I would ask you right now on talking about this perception, interpretation, and context, and looking into 2024, whether it's for your money or just your soul in this world we live in nowadays, you got to ask yourself, how many of those thoughts are positive? How many of those thoughts are looked at it from a glass half full versus a glass half empty? This study, and why I brought it up, I think was really fascinating because as stated, this illusion, which likely you've seen before, and if you are driving right now, take a look at this later. Just type in rabbit, duck, image. And you can't see the same thing in the same image. But if you put them together and someone were to told you these three words, duck eats rabbit, your brain has the context to see what it wants to see. Remember, you're being told it, so therefore it can see it. And I've said this saying before, and I'll say it again. It's a good way to end this week's show. It's not the water around a boat that sinks a ship. It's the water that gets in. Protect your mind, protect what's getting in, make sure you talk it out with someone to make sure it's the right way to perceive things, especially as important as your money, because that's the way you're going to have success with anything you do in the investing world. Hey, hope you enjoyed that show today. If you did, make sure again to go to our website at onecapital.com. You can download and subscribe to our show. And as always, before acting on anything discussed today, speak with a financial advisor near you about your specific situation. Or again, if you'd like our help, you can reach us at 805-410-5454 or on our website at onecapital.com. And until next week, always remember to make your money matter.
The information in this show is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration a listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision.